He wakes up in the middle of the night with your name on his mind. He reaches for his phone almost automatically, like a familiar ritual. He opens the chat that hasn't had new messages in months. His fingers type words that will never be sent. I dreamed about you again. Something amazing happened today, and you were the first person I thought of. Sometimes I wonder if you still think of me. Full paragraphs formed in the darkness of the early morning. Confessions, questions, memories, regrets. His thumb hovers over the send button for long seconds. Then, as always, he selects everything and deletes. He locks his phone, sets it aside. He takes a deep breath in the dark. Another message that exists only as a digital ghost. If this reminded you of someone, write, "I felt that." Maybe other women are also trying to understand what no one sees. Sometimes what's left unsaid screams louder than any word. There's something profoundly human and paradoxically lonely about the messages we write only to delete. In the words we carefully craft, revise repeatedly, consider sending only to at the last moment completely erase, as if the very act of articulating thoughts were simultaneously necessary and too frightening to share. It's in this contradictory ritual that he lives now, in this peculiar dance between the desire for connection and the fear of the vulnerability it would require. In this emotional limbo, where the need to express constantly competes with the terror of what that expression might unleash. Can you imagine that moment, that prolonged hesitation when the fingers hover over the send button, that suspended instant between the possibility of renewed connection and the relative comfort of the status quo? It's a moment filled with contradictory meanings, of hopes and fears competing for dominance, of momentary courage giving way once again to familiar caution, of doors left ajar being gently closed before anyone might notice they were, for a brief moment, almost open. The messages themselves vary in content, but they share an essential quality. All represent truths that he cannot deny to himself, but also cannot share with you. Thoughts that need to be articulated, but not necessarily communicated. Feelings that seek expression, but not necessarily reception. Some are simple and straightforward, almost casual in their phrasing. I saw something today that reminded me of you. I passed that cafe you loved. That song you showed me came on the radio. Small observations that seem innocent enough, but carry a more significant subtext. You are still present in his daily experience of the world. You still influence how he perceives places, objects, sounds. You still exist as an active presence in his consciousness, not just as a distant memory. Other messages are more elaborate, more vulnerable, more revealing. I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, about the mistakes I made, about how I could have acted differently. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like if we had a second chance, if we could do better this time. I try to imagine what your life is like now, if you're happy, if you found what you were looking for. These are deeper reflections that express not only longing or nostalgia, but also regret, curiosity, maybe even a cautious hope for reconciliation, or at least some form of more satisfying closure. And occasionally, in those particularly vulnerable moments, often late at night when defenses are naturally lower, when loneliness feels sharper, when the need for connection temporarily outweighs the fear of rejection, the rawest and most honest confessions arise. I still miss you every day. I haven't gotten over it like I pretended to. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm scared I lost you forever. Fundamental truths he can barely admit to himself during the day, but that emerge in the stillness of the night like bubbles rising to the surface of deep waters. Acknowledgements that need to be expressed somehow, even if that expression is fleeting, meant to exist only for moments before being deliberately erased. What makes him delete these messages time and again? What stops him from finally pressing send after so many failed attempts? The reasons are multiple, complex, and often contradictory, like most genuine human motivations. There's the obvious fear of rejection, of the message being sent and ignored, of the vulnerability being exposed and unreciprocated, of the outstretched hand that remains empty in the air. It's an understandable, almost universal fear, the possibility that the current silence may be preferable to the certainty of explicit rejection. There's also the concern about timing, about appropriateness, about whether he has the right to re-enter her life after so long. Is it too late, he wonders? Has enough time passed? Or maybe too much time? Questions without clear answers that feed indecision, justify continuous postponement, and turn each written message into yet another one destined to be deleted. And there are more selfless considerations as well, although perhaps mixed with convenient rationalizations. The uncertainty about whether you want that contact, whether an unexpected message would be welcome or intrusive, whether opening that channel of communication would be a gift or a burden for you. Would you be better off without this, he wonders. Are you moving on and don't need reminders of the past? Would it be selfish of me to interrupt the silence that might have brought you peace? Questions that don't have definitive answers, but offer perfect justifications to stay in the familiar pattern. Write, reflect, hesitate, delete. A cycle that provides momentary relief of expression without the risk of real exposure. Have you ever felt that inexplicable intuition that someone is thinking about you? That feeling that doesn't come from logic or evidence, but from somewhere deeper, more instinctual, more connected? Maybe you feel that sometimes. Perhaps in specific moments, often late at night when the world is quiet and distractions have faded, you sense a kind of energetic presence. An awareness of being remembered, thought of, perhaps even spoken of through words that never reach you. And maybe you're right. Perhaps in those precise moments, he is indeed typing one of those messages meant to be deleted, entering your name, forming thoughts about you, creating a one-sided connection that exists only for a brief moment before being deliberately unraveled. It's a peculiar form of communication, these unsent messages, an expression that never finds reception, a dialogue that remains perpetually one-sided, words that exist only as potentials, as unrealized possibilities, like digital ghosts that briefly appear on the screen before being banished back to the realm of the unsaid. And still, there's something profoundly significant about this seemingly futile ritual, something revealing about human nature in its contradictory complexity, about how we can simultaneously crave connection and fear vulnerability, about how we can feel intensely yet hesitate to express ourselves, about how we can continue internal dialogues with people who are no longer present in our external lives. What makes this habit particularly fascinating is its veiled universality. It's something many do, yet few admit. A private practice carried out in moments of solitude, rarely shared or openly discussed. A common secret that many keep, without realizing how many others are engaged in the same contradictory ritual. How many messages are written and deleted each day? How many confessions, questions, observations, regrets are formulated only to be erased before they can fulfill their ostensible purpose of communication? How many potential dialogues never materialize because momentary courage yields at the last instant to familiar fear? And what does this say about our fundamental emotional needs, about the human impulse to express, to articulate, to give shape to thoughts and feelings, even when that expression is private, ephemeral, intended only to exist for moments before being deliberately erased? Perhaps there is a kind of catharsis in this process, a partial release that comes from the simple act of forming the words, seeing them on the screen, imagining for a brief moment what it would be like if they were actually sent and received, as if the mere act of articulating thoughts provides some relief, some clarity, some sense of having externally validated what previously existed only internally. Or maybe it's a way to keep the connection alive, even if it's one-sided, to continue the dialogue, even if only in potential, to preserve the possibility of communication, even if that possibility is never truly realized. For him, these unsent messages serve multiple psychological functions. They are moments of honesty with oneself, recognition of emotional truths that he may deny during the day, but which emerge in the vulnerability of the night. Connection, albeit imaginary, albeit one-sided, with someone who still occupies a significant space in his heart and mind. There's also a kind of comfortable limbo in this practice, a safe zone between complete separation and risky reconnection, a middle ground that allows for expression without exposure, articulation without real vulnerability, communication without the risk of rejection or indifference. It's a way of living in possibilities without having to face realities, of keeping all doors potentially open without having to walk through any of them, of preserving all possible versions of the future without having to commit to any of them. And perhaps there's something profoundly human in this desire for open possibilities, in this reluctance to close doors definitively, in this tendency to preserve potentialities, even when we rarely find the courage to turn them into realities. But there's also something inevitably melancholic in these messages meant to never be read. Something bittersweet in these carefully articulated thoughts that are only deliberately erased. Something lonely in these dialogues that remain perpetually one-sided, in these confessions that never find an audience, in these questions that never receive answers. Because in the end, no matter how cathartic the process of writing these messages may be, no matter how comfortable the limbo of unrealized possibilities feels, there is a fundamental truth that cannot be ignored. Unspoken words remain unheard. Unexpressed thoughts continue to be unknown. Unshared feelings exist only within the confines of a heart, never having the chance to resonate with another. And so, night after night, the ritual continues. The phone is unlocked. The old conversation is opened. Words are typed, sometimes few and simple, sometimes many and complex. The thumb hovers over the send button in a moment of prolonged hesitation, and then, as always, everything is selected and erased. An expression without reception, an articulation without communication, a bridge built halfway, never reaching the other shore. Is it possible you do this too? That you also have moments of weakness, of vulnerability, of midnight honesty, where you write messages that you never send, where you formulate thoughts that remain unshared, where you continue a dialogue that exists only in potential. Or maybe you are different. Perhaps you have found the courage that he can't seem to find, the resolve he keeps postponing, the ability to either move fully forward without looking back, or to truly reach out, truly risk, truly press send when your fingers hover over that momentarily feared and desired button. In any case, there is a truth he still hasn't fully embraced, that unrealized possibilities eventually become missed opportunities. That doors theoretically held open, but never actually crossed eventually close with time. That messages repeatedly written and erased remain, in essence, non-existent in the only place where they truly matter, in the real communication between two people. Maybe one day he will find the courage he has been seeking, the clarity he has been avoiding, the resolution he has continuously postponed. Maybe one day one of those nighttime messages will finally survive until dawn, resisting the familiar urge to be deleted, finally fulfilling its ostensible purpose of communication. Or maybe not. Maybe he will remain in this self-imposed limbo, in this pattern of expression without exposure, in this ritual of articulation without genuine communication. Perhaps all of these messages will stay as they were meant to be, digital ghosts that exist only for moments before they vanish without a trace, except in the memories of those who wrote them. And there might be a lesson here, perhaps, a truth about courage and connection that transcends this specific story, about how the possibility of rejection often keeps us from risking the chance of connection, about how the relative comfort of the status quo often outweighs the desire for clarity, even when that clarity could bring liberation, about how we engage in elaborate dialogues with people who are no longer present in our lives, while avoiding the one conversation that could truly make a difference, the one that requires real vulnerability, genuine exposure, authentic courage. Because in the end, the only message that matters is the one we actually send. The only thought that stands a chance of being shared is the one we express openly. The only bridge that can truly connect two people is the one we build completely, not just halfway. And in the meantime, he continues his nightly ritual, unlocking his phone, opening the old conversation, typing carefully chosen words, hesitating, considering, and finally deleting. Once again postponing the moment of true decision, once again choosing the familiar limbo of unrealized possibilities over the frightening uncertainty of potential realities. One message after another, one night after another, an unshared thought after another. Words that exist only as digital ghosts, like ephemeral expressions, like unfinished bridges that never reach the other shore. If this reflection resonated with you, if you recognized yourself in any aspect of this dynamic, whether as someone who writes messages only to delete them, or as someone who intuitively feels that someone is thinking of you more than external communications suggest, share it with someone who needs to understand that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. And subscribe to the channel to receive more reflections that illuminate the hidden corners of the human heart, revealing the contradictory patterns that often keep us trapped between desire and fear, between expression and silence, between imagined possibilities and lived realities.